Hello, everybody from East Lansing, Michigan. And my name is Matt Helm. And I want to thank Mrs. Green and Kelly King for asking me to create a blog, a video blog, or a written blog, answering a few questions, related to nature and the environment and climate change. And so I want to thank Mrs. Green for the beautiful work that you're doing, for inviting me to participate. I'm a different person because of the work that Mrs. Green is doing. And so I want to answer these three questions. And I started to write this out in a kind of a written blog. And I decided, you know what? I want to make a connection with you face to face. So here I am answering these three questions, which were: when or how were the seeds of the environment, the planet, your connection to the planet, when were those planted for you? And the second question is: what do you do in your life to celebrate your values, including work life? What choices do you make? What causes do you support? How are you actively engaged with reversing global warming or stopping climate change? And the third question is, if you could talk to planet Earth, what would you say to them about climate change? And what would you want humanity to understand? And so those are the three questions I'm playing with. And God, I just thought it was really interesting that today I chose to wear my office shirt. For those of you who don't know, I know there's a bio with my blog, but I am a healer, I'm a coach, I'm a therapist, I'm a university administrator, and a wellness director. I do just a variety of things. And you look at my shirt right here, this is the logo for my office, which is Graduate Student Life and Wellness. And in the root structure of this tree here is the word wellness. And then the canopy is success. So to give you a little sense of what I believe and what I do here for students, for clients, is move them in the direction of well-being. And I believe that humanity's well-being is directly proportional to the Earth's well-being in every sense. So this first question: how are the seeds of the environment or planet, the planet, our world, nature, planet for me? I mean, I believe that they're in me. I believe the seed is part of who I am, this deep connection, this feeling of oneness with planet Earth. So it's just there. Now, I've forgotten that over the years, even though I would say I'm an outdoorsy type person. I've hunted and hiked, and I can't harm animals anymore, so I don't hunt anymore. But certainly from a very young age, was in the woods, called into the woods. I come from a family that where we didn't have a lot of economic resources, and certainly there wasn't the technology that we have today. So when we were kids, we played in the woods. And I vividly remember catching tadpoles and crayfish, really catching anything that moved that was wildlife. We didn't have bears and things like that around me and mountain lions, but boy, I did go after, snakes and tadpoles and, frogs. I regularly had a bucket full of tadpoles. And one day I caught 15 garter snakes, and I used to love to bring these home, and my mother did not like me bringing snakes into the house and frogs into the house. And one of the other things I used to love to do was to catch tadpoles and watch them metamorphosize into frogs. And so I'd have a bucket full of 100 tadpoles, and in a couple weeks, don't do the science on this for me, but I guess about a couple weeks, it'd be a bucket full of frogs. And I'd always let them go, but it was just fun to watch that process happen. And so Mother Nature, called me in to her presence very, very early in life. And it was such an easy choice to make, to walk into the woods. And I still know exactly how it feels. All I got to do is walk into the woods at any time. And it feels very, very familiar, very similar to when I was 5 years old, 6 years old. And I also remember when there weren't kids to play with, my natural inclination was to just walk right into the woods and begin exploring and feeling her support, her care, her love and kindness for me. And I can feel that right now as I'm sitting here talking to you. So the seeds were planted early, and my great-grandfather also bought a piece of property on the Asabo River that all the family would go to. And so the river was a big part of my early childhood development, early connection to nature. And as I was writing out some of my thoughts, I sat there and I was thinking and reflecting on what do I remember and love the most about nature? And there is the most beautiful fragrance that comes off the Asabo River that is a combination of the riverbank, the soil, the river, and the air, and the trees and the vegetation that just smells exquisite. And it's one of my favorite parts of the river. And it's almost like, as I take that breath of that beautiful fragrance, it's almost like nature is saying, I love you and I care about you. And we're deeply and intimately connected to each other. Because when I smell that aroma, that fragrance, it makes me feel pure joy, like I'm cared about. And so there's this reciprocal symbiotic relationship between me and nature. And every time I'm on a trail, on a hike, next to the ocean, climbing a tree, that was the other thing, is climbing a tree to the top and just spending that time on these amazing living creatures, trees, was something I did all the time. I've spent hours and hours and hours of my life in trees and next to the water and next to the river. And so that's kind of the beginning of my life. There was just this natural, inherent connection to nature, deeply intimate connection to nature. And then for me, it was slowly conditioned out of me, living in this culture. This culture that wants us to consume. And I think about K through 12 education, and as a child, where most children go throughout the day is inside of a building. And yeah, there's different educational models or approaches, but the vast majority of children are educated inside buildings, and are taught to think a certain way. Basically, we're deeply and heavily conditioned and socialized indoors to see the world a certain way, which is antithetical in many ways to what it means to be a human being. So I believe we're naturally free. I believe we're born naturally free and naturally and intrinsically connected to nature. And that built within that oneness, that connection, is a profound understanding and intuition of how we're supposed to live in congruence with the planet and its natural rhythms. And it's really completely antithetical to the way we are living as human beings now. And it is the conditioning that we're receiving in multiple ways. It's a form of reality that, quite frankly, doesn't work for planet Earth. And I work in higher education where we're training scientists to look at these issues. And yet, if anyone were to look critically at why the world is the way that it is, all you got to do is trace the systems that have been developed, our political and economic and industrial systems. And again, I work in higher education, but what is education really meant to do? These are some of the critical questions I'm going to pose at the end when I talk about the message that I want to deliver to planet Earth, which is, pretty critical. I love my people, but it saddens me that most people are not living completely sovereign lives of freedom. They're living out their conditioning. And so I'll get to that next. But there's how the seeds of nature, of my concern and connection to planet Earth were developed early on in life. And then what do I do to celebrate? What choices do I make related to reversing climate change? How am I actively working to support a different way of being human that's more congruent with the needs of planet Earth? And these are questions I've reflected on over the course of my life as a healer and a coach and a therapist. Virtually all of my clients come to me with issues that are related to not being free, that are related to the conditioning they received as men or women, the ways in which they were treated within their families or within their educational experience or within their peer groups. And in one way or another, we're all, traumatized by things that happen in everyday life. And, a perennial issue that is an issue with me and virtually everyone I come into contact with is fear and fight or flight. And how do we deal with basically living within the system that we live in that suggests that we need to become something other than we are to be seen as valued? So there's a reality system. There's a real reality structure that we learn as we're growing up. And so for me, as I forgot the deepest aspect of who I am through this conditioning process that I went through, that we all go through within our families, within education, both K through 12 and higher education. And in my case, I've got an advanced degree, a PhD in higher education and a master's in college student development. My BA's in psychology and sociology. So I've been interested in these issues throughout my life. And so interestingly though, I had to go through significant discomfort and pain as I navigated, the question of who am I? My first couple years of college, I really encountered, who am I? What am I? And it wasn't until, I was in college really struggling with a relationship, my first significant relationship where it was falling apart and it was really painful. And I began to cope in really unhealthy ways with just a feeling of emotional pain. And in coping with this breakup, with substances, alcohol, drug use, that kind of thing, I ran into a part of myself that wanted to heal. So began to really address what's going on inside of me, and why do I feel so much pain? And so this started a journey, inward journey, to examining my belief system and examining really how did I become who I am. And as a conscious being with choice, I did not know, the kind of choices that I had. I was externally focused, and I thought that I needed to be what this external world wanted me to be. And as I started to wake up and I started to heal and to find others in community that were also experiencing some of this pain, my connection to nature again emerged. And it was very powerful and very intuitive, and found myself back in the woods, back in the wilderness, internally and externally, in the literal woods. And started to read voraciously on any philosophy you can imagine that was about waking up. I started to wake up. I personally started to wake up and started to acknowledge who I was, which was something much more than I had been taught in my family or in this educational system. I was deeply connected to all people and all of life. And this kind of deep ecology led me to different friends, as I changed on the inside. I call it really climate change from the inside out. As I started to free myself and heal the parts of myself that needed attention, and started to touch my intrinsic, authentic self, my natural connection to the world and to this notion of oneness came back powerfully. And I read a book called Deep Ecology, Living as If Nature Mattered, on my own. It wasn't part of a class I was taking. It was actually something one of my poet friends, who would have thought? I got a friend who's a poet, as I start to wake up and heal. And Deep Ecology, Living as If Nature Mattered. I pulled it off the shelf as I was trying to answer this question. And so the seed of my connection to nature, which was always there, was brought back to the surface in my early 20s. And it led me to my first stint with vegetarianism, because Deep Ecology looked at the anthropomorphic kind of worldview that human beings are the center of the universe. And as such, we are the top. And that everything needs to kind of situate itself around us, which includes the environment, the world, the animals. And I decided that I didn't want to eat animals anymore, and I didn't want to mistreat living creatures anymore. And little did I know that that form of diversity was going to be, have such negative consequences for my fellow humans and for me. And so how am I living this more in my life? First of all, I had to become more conscious of what the issues related to climate change are. And so, of course, there's your CO2 emissions, and as one of the number one contributors to global warming, and learning that the science validates that humanity and our behavior as human beings is contributing significantly to the warming of the planet. And so, obtaining a knowledge base about what climate change is and how it happens, and from kind of moving from a pre-contemplative place with a lot of these issues to letting them in and contemplating them in my own mind and letting my heart really examine the impact this is having on virtually all of life around the planet, the clear cutting of forests, the ways in which we treat humanity, the number of pounds of grain necessary to produce 1 pound of beef. The notion that we actually kill and eat animals, and that we pull sea life out of the oceans and lakes and rivers and consume these other living creatures just became ludicrous to me. And as I started to make these changes in my life, into my 30s, and to pay attention to what I was fueling and consuming in my body, I realized how hard it was to change the conditioning. So there's no judgment. We're conditioned into these ways of being, deep, deep, deep socialization that becomes habituated and then felt as self and who we are. So dismantling and dissolving these more false aspects of who I am that were leading me to consume virtually everything. I mean, when you trace consumption, it's not a conspiracy. You can look at who the power and dominant system players are on the planet. And my education, my PhD, most of my PhD forced me to look at power and oppression. And in the case of talking with you all, I'm talking about the oppression of planet Earth, the oppression of all human beings, in terms of how power and how education, a tool, an instrument, an institution of the power, conditions humanity to behave and act a certain way. And it's one thing, for A to have power over B, the dominant system to have power over B because it's stronger and a bully and can force B into behaving the way it wants. It's another thing when A has the power to create the entire reality system that we live out of and in to control. And that A, the dominant culture, has power over B, humanity, and that B thinks it's who it is. B thinks that, that's the way men are, or that's the way we're supposed to behave. And certainly shame and guilt, all these different tools that are used as discipline to get us in the boxes to behave the way that they want us to behave. This isn't openly discussed, right? How would the world look if people were conditioned or were taught to stay in their essence? And the more that I work with people in healing and in coaching, in their essence, when we break through the conditioning and dissolve those aspects of them that have been deeply conditioned into beliefs and into emotions and into their, in some cases, carrying trauma of shame where they've been hurt, when you start to heal and dissolve these things, what's there in the essence, what I found, is peace, love, contentment. There's nothing left that would want to harm or hurt. Now, this is the journey that leads to true, complete freedom, to freedom's edge, the journey to freedom's edge, just to having a choice, to seeing these false elements that are part of your beingness, and to having a choice. The deep question, who are you? If I were to say, feel who you are here and now, who are you? I do this with my clients all the time. And they say, well, I'm a man and I work here. And I say, no, thank you, but who are you? In your essence, who are you? And do you want to be an internally governed person? Or do you want to let this external world continue to dictate that you be something that it needs you to be versus who you are? So when I think about how am I living and reversing global warming, part of what I do with my healing process is I bring people back to who they are, to heal the trauma that gets delivered as a regular part of life. And all the structures of the mind and emotions that get built as armor to protect that essence, that beautiful intrinsic part of each human being. When I help to heal that, help that individual to explore the path towards freedom's edge, there's then a choice, right? The edge of the false and the true. What I found in myself is when I found that edge, freedom's edge, and I jumped, it was the most liberated feeling I've ever experienced. And so how do you live from that authentic true self, free from all the abandonment, all the conditioning? The abandonment is in the abandonment of the true self. When you've got to become someone other than you are in order to survive. When you've got to become someone other than you are in order to feel love from a parent because they expect you to behave in ways that make them feel okay. And unfortunately, our parents, our grandparents, they've all been through this conditioning process. This is the hero's journey, this departure from the conditioning, the way you've been trained to be. So beyond that, every person I work with, I'm just trying to help bring them back to their authentic self, their authentic beingness. And usually there, I'm seeing that choices start to open up for them. And that is the number one thing that I do when working with people is I coach them through removing charge, through removing trauma, through removing limiting beliefs that keep them, from living completely and authentically free. And so, yeah, it's pretty controversial to say that, the vast majority of humanity is not free. And if they were, I truly believe that if humanity woke up to the systems that operate external to them, that have duped them into believing they're someone that they're not, that they're taught and conditioned to behave, and in some ways to be sheep, K through 12, you go sit in a desk and you study what they want you to study. I've got 3 children. I've talked to them about this and let them know that what I mostly care about is they wake up to their full purpose, capital P purpose. And that's not going to college and learning a discipline and getting trained in a certain field so that you can go work within our economy and based on your proximity to the market, get paid a certain amount. And so then you can easily see why women are paid less than men because they're in traditionally more caring fields, and why business and industry and engineers are paid a lot more, and typically more men are in those fields. And so I've taught my children as best as I can to know who they are, and that I support them living from this creative, beautiful place. So that led me to being a vegetarian. I don't want to eat animals. There's no judgment for those who do, but I just found for myself that I just don't want to harm any living creature. And also I want to know what's in my food. And so I started to read about food politics and what I'm putting in my body. So I spend a lot of time meal planning every week and reading just reading labels. Just recently, just a couple days ago, I looked at my organic almond milk, which I steam and I put in my coffee, and there were a variety of chemicals, preservatives in my organic almond milk. And I just grabbed it as a choice for organic. And then I read, after I'd already been using it, all of the chemicals that were in it. And my children see me doing this. I have my 19-year-old, 17-year-old, and 14-year-old, 15-year-old paying attention to what they put in their body and paying attention to what they allow to become their reality system, including me as their father, who has to parent with certain rules that need to govern our life together, and to certainly pay attention to how I was parenting. And can I give a loving parenting approach that's healing versus harming or shaming? So I had to dissolve lots and lots of ideas and heal lots of things about how I was raised in order to be the kind of parent that I want to be. So that's another way that I kind of live this. And you'd say, well, how is this related to global warming or climate change? All of the ways we get harmed and all the ways that we get shamed creates an internal ecology that is how we respond to the world. And if we're responding to the world with fear and with internalized trauma and internalized shame and internalized guilt, the notion that we're going to step out there and stand up for this planet is not going to happen. So as I was telling Mrs. Green in an interview on her podcast, I believe that we need to have climate change from the inside out. That means to critically examine what we've been taught about life, about what matters, what we've been taught to value. Certainly we've been taught to consume, right? That we are what we own. As a man, I was taught that success is in possessions and materialism, that success is not to feel emotions, not to cry, not to have these affective, beautiful qualities of love or to express gratitude and appreciation and love. And so men have the highest rates of depression and anxiety and suicide. We're starting to understand this a little bit better. So this is part of the climate change from the inside out. How to examine radical self-inquiry, radical inquiry into why do I believe the way that I believe? How do I feel when I believe that? Is a great question. Byron Katie, her model of these 4 questions. Is the thought true? How do I feel if I believe that thought? And so this is getting radical with the screen of consciousness, that as you close your eyes and open it, there's the screen of consciousness that we all possess. How is that screen, 90% of which we bring to it, is our conditioning? So that led me to lots and lots of different choices. First of all, lots of research on food and growing food and how is food grown and what does my food eat, and fossil fuels, and following, just last night 60 Minutes did a special where these young kids, these teenagers, are suing the federal government, suing these companies. And they traced it back to the Lyndon administration. So we're talking 70 years or so, where there was evidence that burning fossil fuels was contributing to global warming. And yet it went ignored. And so having a really critical perspective around that. Now, yes, I've known this, but looking at how, big business and industry influences our government. And That's something that we all need to be aware of. And so what did I do? I pulled my two daughters in front of the, yes, we have a TV, which I try to remember is part of the conditioning tools. But I brought my daughters in front of the 60-minute special, and we had a really interesting dialogue about it. And these are the kind of things I do, the kind of things I do at the dinner table every night that we have dinner, is to speak about things that matter. I think when I'm an old man and I'm sitting around my rocking chair, my kids will say, our dad used to force us to sit around and have these dialogues about the planet and about human treatment and about animals and where we live in our purpose. And I'd be like, yeah, that's part of what I did. And then I bought a hybrid vehicle, and I drove a vehicle that doesn't burn as much fossil fuel. And my next purchase will be looking at what the most earth-friendly technology to move me from point A to B will be, because not electricity, you've got to be critical about that and where that electricity is coming from. So I'm beginning to look at solar energy for my home and how to fuel a car with solar energy and how to fuel my body with healthy, nutritious food. And teaching leaders in my role as an educator. In my Leadership Institute, one of the things that students have to do as part of being accepted into this Leadership Institute is they have to select a global issue that is relevant, and they have to educate and inform themselves on this global issue and then respond to it, to evaluate and reflect on the need for this, and then to celebrate serving in this way. And I think this final question that I was asked was, what message do you want to share with the world? If you could speak to every human being on the planet, what would you want them to understand? And I'd want them to understand that the threat of extinction is real. It's real. We are a species that actually has a say, given that hundreds and thousands of species go extinct on a daily basis. We are the one species that has a say in our own extinction, and we're choosing extinction, which is insanity. It's insanity. And yet, we're choosing it. And why? Why in the world would a species who understood that it had a choice to heal the earth, why would we do that? You have to come back to this deep conditioning that we need to transform the entire reality system that we use to live as human beings. That we have these major capacities that lie dormant, that we've not been taught to cultivate. Our heart, the intelligence of our heart, is way, way beyond the intellect, the IQ. Our spiritual intelligence is way, way, way beyond just using the mental faculty. We have large, expansive capacities for intuition, for deep connection, for living congruently with the earth. And so I basically implore you as a human being living on this planet with this just beautiful, beautiful planet and these beautiful human beings to wake up, to ask yourself a handful of questions If we're going to heal the planet, I truly believe we've got to heal humanity. We've got to heal our mental, emotional, and physical bodies. And from this place, these higher capacities that we possess are right there, ready to be in connection with this next stage of our evolution as human beings. That we can heal the trauma, the emotional trauma that sits right inside of us. We can dissolve limiting beliefs. We can dissolve any belief that isn't who we truly are, living powerfully in the here and now. And so some of the questions I have for you, if you're listening, is who are you? Who are you if you're not your position, if you're not your education? Who are you if you're not your gender or your sexual orientation? Who are you? And then feel into that question. Feel who you are. And feel who you are not. And ask that question over and over and over until you sense who you are. Ask yourselves, with how I believe the world is, where did that belief come from? Being a conscious being with choice, would you believe that for yourself now? So question your beliefs. Where did they come from? What does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a man or a woman? What were you taught about being a man or a woman? And if you could write your own view of that, what would you write? How would you live? What does it mean to live as nature mattered? If you were to live as if nature mattered, as if it were equal to your life, how would you live? How would you treat the planet? How would you treat your fellow humans? How would you treat the animals, the living trees, the oceans, the lakes? What does living as if you mattered look like? Would you scrutinize a little bit more closely what you're putting in your body? Many of the diseases today are because of how we're living. We're creating our own diseases. So as you wake up and you explore intentionally who you are, how do you want to live? Where do you want to live? A lot of times I think that, actually I know that the more free I become in mind, body, and spirit, the more I know I'm going to travel the world. I'm going to talk to people. And I'm going to live where I choose to live. So what does it look like to live as if you matter to yourself? In every way. What does the world look like if you treated people with significance like they mattered? Even more importantly, if you want to change your life for the better, make other people feel significant. You want to change the world, make this whole human experience about others and making them feel significant. Make this whole existence about making the world, this planet, feel significant to you. Take air away for less than a minute and tell me air is not significant. Take water away for a couple days and tell me that water isn't significant. Take your food away. Take your shelter away and tell me all of the beautiful resources that this planet provides for us. Appreciate, make it feel significant. how would somebody who truly loved themselves treat others and the planet? Do you love yourself? And so the good news is, a lot of the good news is if you're watching this, you're on your way. Um, I care about this planet. I care about you. I haven't even met you, and I feel a deep, deep connection and love to the human beings on this planet, to the animals on this planet, to all of life on this planet. And so will you stand up? Will you help to create a new reality, a new way of being, a new way of love on this planet that's inclusive of all of life as a conscious being with choice? My favorite author, one of my favorite planetary leaders, Carl Jung, said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This way we're living collectively is unconscious. And until we make it conscious, we will call it fate. And our fate right now, and the direction that we're moving, is that the planet is dying. It's certainly warming. So will you and I and the rest of the human beings on this planet become more conscious to the system that's been created that we're living in? Will you choose to be different? And will you choose to lead a different planet Earth towards a new consciousness, one that's inclusive of the health and well-being of the planet and every life living on it? I hope you will. I know that I am. And I welcome you as a partner as we lead change on this planet. Thanks for having me.